Let's talk about Urth of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. If you want, you could think of it as book 5 in the Book of the New Sun. It's a sequel or coda to that. Book of the New Sun was written more or less as one block by Wolfe. This was written nearly a decade later, or I guess 7 years later. Partly in response to pressure or requests from his publisher and from readers to follow up what happens in Book of the New Sun. The way I'll structure this review, which will be non-spoiler, is I'll give a very brief overview of is it good? Is it a good continuation of the Book of the New Sun without any spoilers for Book of the New Sun either, or anything meaningful? And then I'll talk a bit about this book in relation, without spoiling it, but in the context of talking about Book of the New Sun, so there will be spoilers for that. So let's start with the general review. It's really good. I don't know where I rank it in my Book of the New Sun or Solar Cycle overall. I think the big plus, there's a couple of big pluses. It is often, even by Wolfian standards, particularly beautifully written, and at points in the back third, almost hypnotic in its rhythm and in the way it's flowing, the slightly dreamlike pattern of events about Severian, the torturer's apprentice of the first book, and what's happened to him, after him being the hero of the Book of the New Sun, basically. And he is sorry, I'll just read a Ursula K. Le Guin review from the back, actually. Gene Wolfe's new book soars, falls free, runs like the river that runs through it from universe to universe, between life and death and life again. The ground note of it all is human pain, so that this fantasy has the weight of vision. Pain there not being that this is a tormented book, but this is a book resolving things to do with pain, to do with trauma. It's very beautiful. It's very reflective. It is both mysterious and direct. I think the only substantive critique I have, it is in a slightly different voice to the first 4 or 1, depending on how you count it. It's the same voice, it's Severian, but there are differences as well in what he's doing in his narration. There is, if there's one criticism, it is, and that's not a criticism, that's just an observation. If there's one criticism, it's, I think, through the first half or so, it suffers from a little of what I find, and some people wouldn't agree with me here, but with his book 3s in both of his big quadrilogies in the Solar Cycle. So, Calday of the Long Sun and the Sword of the Lictor, which is that they are both great books, but they both have issues, I think, of pacing and structure to do with the way that events are put together. And here it's a different problem to those two, I think, but there's just a very slight pacing disconnect for me, and I'll have to reflect on it more to be able to fully articulate it, but it meant that I was thoroughly enjoying everything I read, but I wasn't running through it, which with most of his books I do. Still very good though. That's the complete no spoilers for anything. Now let's have a few minutes just talking about this in the context of Book of the New Sun, which I will spoil. Wolfe felt that Book of the New Sun is complete, that it's clear that Severian is going off to become the new sun at the end, and there's a whole, is it his slingshot? It's Kim Stanley Robinson came up with the idea of a slingshot ending to explain how Wolfe does these things sometimes, where I don't know the exact etymology of it, but I guess almost like as the sling is being launched, you see it kind of pinging off. Yeah, I guess it's something like that. The idea that you see this in media res finale, and he's very clever at that you know the conclusion despite not seeing everything. Much like with many things, Wolfe is very able to. He obscures, but he also reveals, and he can reveal in ways that aren't about listing everything. So you start with Severian on a ship, having just finished the Book of the New Sun and desiring to cast it off into space, as he's on this very strange world ship. travelling to somewhere to face judgment as representative of Urth, to see if there will be some kind of renewal of Urth. Now, the interesting thing to me, I said there's differences with voice. Severian, I guess, is narrating this after the fact as well. So he is a slightly different voice to his voice in Book of the New Sun. There's still some of the bi-voicedness, the dual-voicedness. You get explicit mentions of Thekla or the memories of the old Autarka or whatever else. So there's some of that, but there is just a very slight pattern of experience and reflection between the Book of the New Sun and here. And you might reasonably think of that as Gene Wolfe as well. The most interesting thing to me about the authorial voice and Severian tricks is, and I'll keep this as vague as possible, I guess, but is how, in my view, how direct Wolfe is in making this a reflection on Severian and the Book of the New Sun, the story. It is really quite surprising for me. We can spend time. I hold to a Wolfe is generally just telling you the truth. It's just not you read it wrong. We are tempted and tricked into reading things wrong. I think here, I think there's a thing where some people say, "Oh yes, but even in all these things, Wolfe is just lying and tricking you." I don't think he's lying or tricking you in that sense, not maliciously. He draws us on and challenges us, and I think when he has Severian speak critically of himself to people who don't know that he's Severian, when someone says you're a good man, he says, "No, I'm a bad man trying to be good." Those are things that reflect actually attitudes he takes in the Book of the New Sun too. I think Severian is often reflecting on his own role in events, how he's treated women. His issue of how he thinks about women is definitely dealt with here in some detail. There's some really quite beautiful and powerful things in there. I'm thinking actually to do with some lines about Valeria. It's a fascinating reflection, and particularly through the first 2/3 or 3/4, maybe 3/4 of Gene Wolfe saying not just this is the plot conclusion to Book of the New Sun, that may or may not be interesting, surely we only knew what that was, but trying to use this journey to be judged as an opportunity for us to judge Severian and to see his both gaping flaws and his redeeming features. It also raises a question of what is better, and should Urth be renewed but at a great cost, or is that too cruel? Who knows? It is a really interesting story in that way. The other thing that's really interesting, I guess, that's my most interesting thing, is that this is, I think, Wolfe in surprisingly direct form. Tell me how I'm wrong, but in surprisingly direct form. But I think there's also something else going on, I think, in him doing a lot of metaphysics. And I don't want to get into that too much because that could again end up spoiling more than I'd like to. But I think he's very good at raising, as he always does, and he certainly does in Book of the New Sun, but he tells you a lot more about the world of the solar cycle and a lot more about the metaphysics of the solar cycle and of the way in which the increate, i.e. God, connects to different things within it, and the way in which the confusing discussions of time and the corridors of time and things like that, and Master Ash and the Green Man, how all these things, not how they work or how they resolve or how you should, wow, finally we're looking behind the curtain and there's a man sitting on a throne in a green suit or whatever, but rather they give you a broader perspective on those events and those ideas in ways that become increasingly, this is what I was already saying more indirectly, but increasingly moving. There are many moving things in this, but there is, I've read, haven't read, an absolute titanic amount of Wolfe, but I've read 11 Wolfe books, and there are definitely sections in many of those books, but there is little as persistently rhythmically beautiful as the last quarter or last third of this book, in terms of nearly constant. It reminds me, I guess, if anyone of, and it only comes to my mind now, and it's not a close parallel, but to T.S. Eliot in the Four Quartets, with using poetry to, and in this case, poetic and allegorical and hypnotic prose, to try to explore quite big ideas, whether or not they're what Gene Wolfe believes about the universe. He believed in some of that stuff, in terms of the increate, but whether he believed all the metaphysical stuff in here, I don't know, and I also don't think that would be the right question to ask. I think he's attempting to create a world here in a sub-creative way. It's one of the great gifts of Wolfe, is that he plainly, in one sense, without all the superstructure or you do get the etymology, of course, or at least the vocabulary, but he understands his task in some ways, in a way that Tolkien plainly did, without it being the same sort of grand life task for Wolfe. There is a genuine sub-creative ordering of things that comes out in this, the most of all the books of his I've read. And that is in contrast to a reading of Wolfe as an agent of chaos or confusion. So yeah, I really enjoyed Urth of the New Sun. I thought it was stimulating, beautiful, powerful, moving. It was a great last view of Severian, and indeed we meet and see other characters and things and gain perspectives on the past and the future of the things we already know, and with some connections to the other half of the solar cycle as well. The small ones that link New Sun with the Long Sun, Short Sun stuff. And I think, I've read it before I read Short Sun, and I'm glad I did. I think it was published before Long Sun, so there's no, it's not a problem before reading that either. But I think it will enrich my reading of Short Sun, and I think it is. Is it necessary to read after having read New Sun? No, in the sense that Wolfe did not think it was necessary. By that I mean New Sun is a self-contained story and wholly satisfying on its own terms. It is not the same thing as reading Fellowship of the Ring and the Two Towers and then thinking, oh wow, well that's enough for me, I'm glad I got to the end of the story. There, it is, it's not integral in that way. It is, I'm trying to think of a good comparison, because obviously sequels can be the cashing in of things, or purely for money. They can be slightly more positively a positive reinvention and spin, Top Gun Maverick for instance, but that is still, it is serial in nature. I guess you sometimes do get sequels which are a genuine attempt to do this with the same characters, not in the same universe, but with the same characters, to attempt to explore and understand something different. And I'm trying to think of a comparison now, and there certainly will be some. In fact, this is not a bad one in a kind of funny way. I've mentioned Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit to the Lord of the Rings does do some of that with Bilbo, very organically, and because Lord of the Rings was not a direct cash-in, it was a different idea he had when asked for more stuff from his world, and he wanted to go back to the Hobbits. But Bilbo had changed in that, and there was a different thing going on with Bilbo. That's a comparison that comes to mind, and I'm sure we could find many others. Basically, sometimes when books are written separately for different reasons with the same characters, interesting things happen, and I think that is why, though it's not integral to Book of the New Sun, I think if you liked Book of the New Sun, you will like this. If you like Wolfe in general, obviously you will have read the Book of the New Sun, or you should. But yes, I'd certainly say to anyone wondering, I liked Book of the New Sun, should I read this? I would certainly, I'd certainly pick it up. Anyway, tell me what you think of this one in the comments, and I guess in general, maybe talk through your rankings and thoughts, without loads of spoilers or anything, please, of the solar cycle. I'm not at the end of it. I will be ending it this coming year, hopefully, reading Short Sun. But yeah, that's it from me for now, and I'll see you next time.